Two strangers in polo shirts paced Mike's pool, clipboards in hand. Routine inspection for Sunnyside Estates, HOA, one said with a smug smile. Mike frowned. He'd never joined any HOA. His peaceful life was about to unravel. Who are these guys, and why are they after Mike's pool? Stay tuned to find out. If you like this story, give us 39 likes to keep us going and subscribe for more captivating tales. The sun hung low in the sky, painting the quiet suburban street of Maple Street with streaks of gold and orange. It was the kind of evening where the air smelled faintly of fresh-cut grass and barbecue smoke, where the only sound was the distant hum of a lawnmower and the soft chatter of crickets waking up for the night. At 1472 Maple Street, Mike Thompson leaned back in a weathered Adirondack chair on his small back deck, a cold beer sweating in his hand. Before him, the water in his backyard pool shimmered like liquid glass, reflecting the fading light. This was his sanctuary, his little slice of paradise. For 5 years, it had been the heart of his summers. Cool relief on scorching days, laughter-filled barbecues with neighbors, and even the occasional sight of old Mrs. Johnson next door doing her water aerobics in a bright pink swimsuit, her arms flailing like a cheerful flamingo. Life was good, simple, predictable. Mike was a man of routine. At 52, with salt and pepper hair and a frame that suggested he'd once been an athlete but now preferred a slower pace, he'd lived in his modest 3-bedroom ranch house for nearly 2 decades. The neighborhood wasn't fancy. No gated entrances or manicure cul-de-sacs here. Just a patchwork of older homes owned by folks who'd been around longer than the oak trees lining the street. No homeowners association, no meddling rules. Just regular people living regular lives. 5 years ago, Mike had decided to splurge. He'd saved up, gotten the permits, and hired a crew to dig a 16 by 32-foot rectangle into his backyard. Nothing extravagant, just a clean blue pool with a simple wooden deck around it. The day was finished. He'd cannonballed into it fully clothed, grinning like a kid. Worth every penny, he'd thought then, and he still did now. For years, the pool had been his quiet joy. He'd float on his back under the stars, host neighbors for burgers and beers, or just sit by it with a book, the water's gentle ripples soothing his soul. Mrs. Johnson, bless her, had taken to it too. Her water aerobics became a neighborhood spectacle, her laughter echoing over the fence. Even Ted, the gruff retiree across the street, would wander over with a six-pack now and then, muttering about how Mike had done good with the setup. It was peaceful, perfect, until last May, when the first crack appeared in that perfection. It started innocently enough. Mike was in his kitchen, rinsing a plate under the faucet, when something caught his eye through the window. 2 men in matching polo shirts, navy blue, crisp, official-looking, were pacing the edge of his pool, clipboards in hand. One was tall and wiry, the other short and stocky, both moving with the purposeful air of people who thought they belonged there. Mike frowned, setting the plate down with a clink. He wiped his hands on a dish towel, curiosity prickling at him, and stepped out onto the patio. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" he called, his voice firm but friendly, the way you'd greet a lost delivery guy. The men froze, startled, as if they hadn't expected to see the actual homeowner. The taller one recovered first, flashing a tight smile. "Oh, hello, sir," he said, his tone smooth as polished stone. "We're just doing a routine inspection for the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association. Nothing to worry about." Mike's brow furrowed deeper. Sunnyside Estates? That was the new development half a mile down the road, a cluster of cookie-cutter McMansions that had sprung up on old farmland a couple of years back. He'd driven past it once or twice, unimpressed by the identical beige facades and overpriced lots. But what did that have to do with him? "I'm sorry, but there's some mistake," he said, crossing his arms. "I'm not part of any homeowners association." The shorter man glanced at his clipboard, tapping it with a pen. "This is 1472 Maple Street, correct?" "Yeah, but—" "Then you're indeed part of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association, sir," he cut in, his voice clipped and final, like a teacher scolding a slow student. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to finish our inspection." Mike stood there, dumbfounded, the warm evening air suddenly feeling heavy. In 20 years on Maple Street, He'd never heard of Sunnyside Estates claiming anything outside their own boundaries. His house predated their development by decades. He'd never signed a damn thing. "Hold on," he said, stepping forward, his tone hardening. "I'm not a member of your association, and you don't have permission to be here. I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The men exchanged a glance, then shrugged. "Very well," the taller one said, adjusting his clipboard. "Well, you'll be hearing from us soon. Good day, sir." They turned and strolled off, their polished shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. Mike watched them go, scratching his head. What the hell was that about? 3 days later, he'd find out. A certified letter arrived, its crisp white envelope glaring at him from the mailbox like a summons to court. When he tore it open, the words inside hit him like a punch to the gut. "Dear homeowner, it has come to our attention that you have installed an in-ground swimming pool on your property without obtaining proper approval from the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association." Mike's peaceful little world was about to turn upside down. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the soft glow of a single bulb above the sink, when Mike sat down at his worn oak table with the certified letter in hand. Outside, the crickets chirped their nightly symphony, but inside, the air felt thick with disbelief. He adjusted his glasses, squinting at the crisp, black typeface, as if rereading it might make the absurdity vanish. Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association, direct violation of our CC and RS, ordered to remove the non-compliant pool within 30 days, fines of $100 per day. The words swam before his eyes, each one more outrageous than the last. And then, the kicker, alternatively, you may bring your pool into compliance and open it for use by all Sunnyside Estates residents as a community amenity. Mike let out a bark of laughter, sharp and hollow, that echoed off the tiled walls. "They've got to be kidding," he muttered, tossing the letter onto the table like it was a bad joke. Open his pool to strangers? Let some HOA he'd never joined take it over? He'd built that pool with his own money, sweated over the permits, watched the contractors pour the concrete. It was his retreat, his reward after years of quiet, steady living. And now these people, whoever they were, thought they could waltz in and claim it? He stood, pacing the linoleum floor, the soles of his sneakers squeaking faintly. The letter was signed by a Karen Wellington, president, a name that rang no bells. He tried to picture her, some busybody in a pantsuit, maybe with a clipboard and a permanent scowl. Sunnyside Estates was half a mile away, a world apart from Maple Street's unpretentious charm. He'd seen their billboards once, all glossy photos of smiling families and slogans about luxury living. But luxury didn't give them the right to reach across town and snatch his backyard. Grabbing his laptop from the counter, Mike plopped back into his chair and fired up a search. Sunnyside Estates, HOA. He typed, his fingers jabbing the keys harder than necessary. The website popped up, sleek, professional, with a photo of a pristine community pool surrounded by laughing kids. He scrolled through the About Us page, then the bylaws, searching for any mention of Maple Street. Nothing. Not a word about jurisdiction beyond their own development. It was a scam, had to be, or a mistake. Either way, he wasn't about to let it slide. The next morning, the sun was barely up when Mike brewed a pot of coffee, its bitter aroma filling the house. He sat down with a legal pad and a pen, the letter glaring at him from the table's edge. If they wanted to fight, they'd get one. He started drafting a response, his handwriting sharp and deliberate. "Dear Ms. Wellington, I am in receipt of your letter dated May 15th regarding my backyard swimming pool. I'm afraid there's been a grave error. I am not, nor have I ever been, a member of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association. My property at 1472 Maple Street predates your development by nearly 2 decades and is not subject to your rules." He kept it polite but firm, laying out the facts, the permits, the legality, the absurdity of their claim. "Any further attempts to assert control over my private property, including sending representatives onto my land without permission, will be considered trespassing and handled accordingly." He signed it, Michael Thompson, and drove to the post office before he could second-guess himself, mailing it off with a satisfying thud into the certified slot. "That's that," he said to himself, climbing back into his pickup truck. "Problem solved." Oh, how wrong he was. Less than a week later, another certified letter arrived, this one thicker, heavier, like it carried the weight of their stubbornness. Mike ripped it open on his front porch, the morning air still cool against his skin. Dear Mr. Thompson, your claim that you are not subject to the authority of the Sunnyside Estates Homeowners Association is noted but rejected. All properties within a 1-mile radius of Sunnyside Estates automatically fall under our expanded jurisdiction as of January 1st of this year. He stopped reading, his jaw tightening. Expanded jurisdiction? A unanimous vote filed with the county clerk? He hadn't agreed to this. Nobody on Maple Street had. The letter went on. You have 14 days to remove your non-compliant pool or open it for community use. Failure to comply will result in legal action. This is your final warning. Signed, again, by Karen Wellington. Mike crumpled the paper in his fist, his pulse pounding in his ears. This wasn't a mistake anymore. It was a declaration of war. He stormed inside, grabbed his phone, and dialed his old college buddy Steve, a real estate attorney with a knack for cutting through bullshit. Steve, you're not going to believe this, he started, his voice tight with fury. I need your help. Outside, the pool sat silent under the morning sun, its water still and serene. But Mike knew the calm was over. The line had been drawn, and he wasn't about to let them cross it. The morning sun blazed high over Maple Street, turning the asphalt into a shimmering mirage of heat. Mike stood in his kitchen, sipping coffee that had gone lukewarm, staring out at his pool. It looked inviting as ever, crystal blue, the water lapping gently against the sides, a faint breeze rippling its surface. But the peace it once brought him felt distant now, tainted by the memory of those clipboard-wielding strangers and their ridiculous letters. Steve had laughed when Mike read him the latest one over the phone. Expanded jurisdiction? That's the dumbest thing I've heard all year. And promised to draft a cease and desist letter that'd shut this nonsense down. Mike trusted Steve. The guy had a law degree and a wicked sense of humor, a combo that had gotten them out of plenty of scrapes back in college. Still, as the deadline from that second letter loomed, 14 days, now down to 2, Mike couldn't shake a nagging unease. He was rinsing his mug when it happened. A clatter of metal and voices drifted through the open window, sharp and intrusive, cutting through the morning quiet. Mike froze, his hands dripping suds, and leaned toward the glass. Outside, his backyard was no longer his own. A crew of workers in orange vests swarmed around his pool, hauling sections of chain-link fencing, their hammers ringing as they drove stakes into his grass. And there, standing like a queen overseeing her court, was a woman in a crisp white blouse and khaki capris, her arms crossed and a smug smile plastered across her face. She held a clipboard, of course, because what else would she have? And barked orders at the men with the confidence of someone who thought she owned the place. Mike's mug hit the sink with a clank. He stormed out the back door, still in his bathrobe and slippers, the soft flannel flapping against his legs. What the hell is going on here? He roared, his voice bouncing off the fence line. The workers paused, glancing nervously at each other, but the woman didn't flinch. She turned to him, her smile widening, her eyes glinting with something between amusement and triumph. "Good morning, Mr. Thompson," she said, her tone syrupy sweet, like she was greeting a guest at a garden party. "Since you failed to comply with our directives, we're taking matters into our own hands. Your pool is now officially a Sunnyside Estates community amenity." Mike's mouth fell open, his brain scrambling to process the sheer gall of it. "Like hell it is," he shouted, stepping onto the deck, his slippers skidding on the wood. "This is trespassing, vandalism. I'm calling the police right now." The woman, Karen Wellington, he assumed, matching the signature on those cursed letters, tilted her head, unfazed. "Go right ahead," she said, waving a hand dismissively. "We have all the proper documentation. You'll find the law is on our side." She nodded to the workers, who resumed their hammering, the metallic clang reverberating in Mike's skull. He spun on his heel, fury boiling in his chest, and bolted back inside. His hands shook as he snatched his phone off the counter and dialed 911, pacing the kitchen like a caged animal. "Yeah, I've got people trespassing on my property," he snapped when the dispatcher picked up. "They're putting up a fence around my pool, saying it's theirs now. Send someone quick." 15 minutes later, 2 police cruisers rolled up his driveway, lights flashing but sirens silent, cutting through the haze of heat rising off the street. Mike had thrown on jeans and a t-shirt by then, and he met the officers in the front yard, arms crossed, his glare fixed on Karen and her crew. The older cop, a grizzled guy with a salt and pepper mustache, approached first his partner, a younger woman with sharp eyes, trailing behind. "What seems to be the problem here?" the older one asked, his voice calm but firm. Mike launched into it, words tumbling out in a rush. "These people are trespassing, tearing up my yard, claiming my pool belongs to some HOA I don't even belong to. I've lived here 20 years, got all the permits, and they're acting like they can just take it." Karen stepped forward, all poise and polish, handing the older cop a thick folder. "Officers, I assure you, everything here is legal," she said smoothly. "We have documentation proving this property falls under our jurisdiction. Mr. Thompson's been in violation of our bylaws, and we're simply correcting it." The cops flipped through her papers, frowning, while Mike ran inside to grab his own folder. Deed, tax records, pool permits, the works. He thrust it at them, his voice tight. "This is my property. They've got no right." The older cop studied both sets of documents, his brow creasing deeper with every page. After a tense few minutes, he looked up, his tone cutting through the standoff. "Here's how this is going to go. Ms. Wellington, you and your crew need to leave. Now, you've got no legal right to be here, and if you don't go, you're trespassing. Is that clear?" Karen's face flushed a deep, angry red, but she nodded stiffly. The younger cop smirked faintly as the workers began packing up, their fence half erected, a jagged scar across Mike's lawn. Relief washed over him, but it was short-lived. The older cop turned to him. "Mr. Thompson, get a lawyer. They're not backing down easy. This ain't over." As Karen and her minions slunk away, Mike stood on his deck, staring at the mess they'd left behind. The pool glinted in the sunlight, serene as ever, but he knew the fight was just beginning. The days after Karen's backyard invasion blurred into a haze of heat and frustration. Mike's once pristine lawn bore the scars of her crew's half-built fence. Tufts of grass torn up, muddy patches where stakes had been yanked out, a jagged reminder of the audacity he'd faced. The pool still sparkled under the July sun, but every time Mike glanced at it, his stomach twisted. Steve had filed an emergency injunction and a lawsuit. Harassment, trespassing, attempted theft, but the legal gears turned slow, and Sunnyside Estates wasn't backing off. Daily letters arrived now, each one bolder, threatening not just Mike, but his neighbors too, promising fines and lawsuits if they dared support him. It was a siege, and Mike felt the walls closing in. One muggy Saturday morning, the tension snapped. Mike woke to a surreal sight. His front yard was a sea of plastic pink flamingos, their spindly legs stabbed into the dirt, easily 100 of them swaying in the breeze. A giant banner hung between 2 oak trees, its block letters screaming in garish yellow. "Share your pool. SCROOG. The absurdity hit him first. A laugh burst out, wild and ragged. Then the anger surged. This wasn't just harassment. It was vandalism, a taunt from Karen and her cronies. He grabbed his phone to call the cops again, but as he dialed, Ted shuffled over from across the street, a trash bag in hand and a scowl on his weathered face. "This is bullshit, Mike," Ted growled, yanking a flamingo from the ground and tossing into the bag with a plastic clatter. "They're acting like they own the whole damn town." He paused, squinting at the banner. "What are you going to do?" Mike ripped another flamingo free, its beady eyes staring blankly up at him. "I don't know, Ted," he sighed, the weight of it all pressing down. "I can't back down. This is my home. If I give in now, what's next? They'll demand my roof." Ted nodded, slow and thoughtful, then clapped a hand on Mike's shoulder. "You're right. And you know what? We got your back. This affects all of us. If they can bully you, none of us are safe." That was the spark Mike needed. As they cleared the flamingos, neighbors joining in, grumbling and laughing at the ridiculousness, a plan took shape. Why play defense when he could hit back? That afternoon, He called a meeting at his house. The living room filled with familiar faces. Ted with his perpetual frown, Mrs. Johnson in a floral dress, a dozen others clutching iced tea glasses, their voices buzzing with outrage. Mike stood by the window, the pool glinting outside, and laid it out. They think they can dictate our lives, he said, his voice steady. So let's give him a taste of their own medicine. We form our own group, the Maple Street Community Alliance. Nothing official, just us looking out for us. And we send Sunnyside some rules of our own. The room erupted in grins and nods. Over the next few hours, fueled by coffee and spite, they drafted a mock bylaws document, absurd and glorious. All homes within 2 miles of Maple Street, conveniently including Sunnyside, must display a garishly painted garden gnome. Christmas lights stay up year-round. Lawns mowed only between 3 and 5 a.m. on Tuesdays. Cars covered in polka dot tarps. Silly hats required for mailbox checks. Fines for noncompliance? Oh, they be hefty. $200 a day, just a twist of knife. It was childish, sure, but it was a middle finger to Karen's power trip, a mirror held up to her lunacy. They printed copies, stuffed envelopes, and mailed them to every Sunnyside address, plus the HOA board. Then they waited. The fallout came fast. Karen stormed to Mike's doorstep the next day, her face a blotchy red, waving the papers like a battle flag. "What is the meaning of this?" she demanded, her voice shrill enough to scare the birds from the trees. Mike leaned against the doorframe, feigning innocence. "Why not? You claimed authority over us. I'm just following your lead. Maple Street's been here longer, so we've got more right to set rules, don't you think?" "This is absurd," she sputtered. "No one's following these ridiculous demands." "Oh," Mike raised an eyebrow. "But I thought you loved community standards and strict compliance. Isn't that why you've been after my pool?" Karen's mouth flapped open, then shut, her argument choking on itself. She spun and marched off, muttering about lawyers. Mike grinned. Finally, he'd rattled her. Over the next few days, Sunnyside stirred. A few rebels with a sense of humor played along. Gnomes popped up on lawns, a sombrero bobbed at a mailbox, a polka dot sheet draped a BMW. Cracks showed in Karen's empire. Not everyone liked her crusade. Mike's stunt had planted a seed, and the neighborhood watched it grow. But Karen wasn't done. Oh no. She'd doubled down, and soon, Mike would face her next move. For now, though, he stood on his deck, the pool shimmering below, and felt the tide shifting. The July heat clung to Maple Street like a damp blanket, the kind that made your shirt stick to your back and your temper flare at the slightest provocation. Mike felt it. Weeks of sleepless nights, legal filings, and Karen's relentless letters had worn him thin. The pool sat unused, a silent taunt in his backyard, its water clouded with neglect. Sunnyside's pressure tactics had intensified. Threats to sue his neighbors, boycott local businesses that served Maple Street folks, even a petition to annex his property into their HOA by force. It was madness, a vendetta gone off the rails, and Mike was starting to wonder if he'd ever swim in peace again. But then, on a sweltering Saturday afternoon, everything changed. He was out front, wrestling with a dying sprinkler, when a group approached, 4 figures walking up the street, their silhouettes hazy in the heat. Mike straightened, wiping sweat from his brow, his guard up. Sunnyside residents, he realized as they neared. Dave Simmons, a lanky guy with a friendly wave, his wife Carol beside him, and 2 others, Mr. Patel and Mrs. Rodriguez, their expressions earnest. "Mr. Thompson," Dave called, "we'd like to talk if you're willing." Mike hesitated, then nodded. "Sure. Come in, lemonade's cold." 10 minutes later, they sat in his living room, the ceiling fan whirring overhead, glasses clinking with ice. Dave leaned forward, hands clasped. "This HOA mess, it's out of control. A lot of us in Sunnyside didn't sign up for this bullying. What they're doing to you, it's wrong." Carol nodded, her voice soft but firm. "We just wanted a nice neighborhood, not a war." Karen's lost it. Mr. Patel, his silver hair catching the light, chimed in. "She's made decisions without us, shuts down anyone who disagrees. But we're organizing. The next HOA meeting's in 2 weeks. We're voting to recall her board." Mrs. Rodriguez's eyes gleamed with resolve. We need your help, though. Come speak. Tell your story. It could sway the fence-sitters. Mike mulled it over, the ice in his glass melting into a puddle. It was risky, stepping into enemy territory, but if it could end this nightmare. All right, he said finally. But if you win, I want a signed agreement. No jurisdiction over my property or anyone outside Sunnyside's original boundaries. No loopholes. Dave grinned. Deal. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. Mike and Steve polished his speech, calm, reasoned, focused on community over conflict. Dave's group rallied Sunnyside residents, whispers of dissent growing louder. The night of the meeting arrived, and Mike drove into Sunnyside Estates, palms sweaty on the wheel. The clubhouse was packed, rows of folding chairs, standing room only, the air thick with tension. Karen stood at the front, her face a mask of fury as he walked in. This is for residents only, she snapped, but Dave shut her down, citing bylaws. A vote let Mike stay, and then Dave dropped the bomb. I call for a no-confidence vote on the board. The room exploded. Gasps, murmurs, Karen's gavel banging uselessly. The parliamentarian, a retired judge with a wry smile, upheld the motion. Hands shot up across the crowd, a majority clear. One by one, Karen and her allies were recalled, their power crumbling in an hour of chaos. When Mike took the mic, the room hushed. He spoke from the heart, about his pool, the harassment, the sleepless nights, but also about wanting peace, not war. I don't blame you folks, he said. We're all just trying to live. Let's respect that. Applause started slow, then swelled, an older woman tearfully apologizing for Sunnyside's actions. Dave sealed it with a new charter. Limited power, clear boundaries, Mike's property free forever. As people shook his hand after, the hostility melted into warmth. Karen slunk off, defeated, her reign over. Weeks later, the lawsuits faded, and life settled. Sunnyside and Maple Street forged new ties. Block parties, picnics, a shared neighborhood watch. Mike finally cleaned his pool, the water gleaming again. One crisp evening, he hosted that long-delayed party. Neighbors splashing, kids cannonballing, Mrs. Johnson doing her aerobics to cheers. Ted raised a beer from the deck. You did it, Mike. Kept what's yours. Mike dove in, the cool water washing away months of stress. Floating on his back, stars above, he smiled. It wasn't just about the pool anymore. It was about standing up, about community, about winning back his peace. And damn, that swim felt sweet. The sun dipped low, casting a golden glow over Mike's pool as laughter echoed through the yard. The fight was over. Karen was gone, the lawsuits dropped, and Maple Street stood strong. Neighbors splashed and toasted, the water rippling with every dive, a symbol of hard-won peace. Mike floated on his back, staring at the twilight sky, the weight of months lifted. He'd fought for his home, his rights, and won, not just for himself, but for everyone who'd stood by him.